All right. Bismillah wal alhamdulillah wa salawat wa salam ala rasulullah wa alihi wa sahbihi wa min wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear excellent brothers and sisters, colleagues, members from all over the world. We're delighted from the behalf of ISIP, the International Students of Islamic Psychology, to welcome you all to this lecture today as part of our international lecture series that we conduct twice a month, the second Sunday of the month and the last Saturday of the month. It's such an honor to have you all with us. And please keep yourself muted at all times, dear brothers and sisters, so that we can have as beautiful sohbah and companionship with one another as possible. I'm very honored and pleased to have you all with us. Please forgive us for any shortcomings if the communication with marketing this venue hasn't been as swift. We have had some issues recently with our newsletter and also sending out the registration, sending out the link, Zoom link to all of those who registered to our lectures and seminars. Honestly, we don't know why it is, but some of the emails, I think you guys receive it in your spam box. So just for the future venues, please check your spam box as well. But we'll try to see if we can find another tool for emailing out registrations, links, etc. in the future. We're looking at it as we speak, but nevertheless, please forgive us. Also, our Zoom account has some issues today. So usually we let the Zoom chat be open for all of you to connect with one another and ask questions and reflect in regards to the topic and themes of the lectures that we conduct. But today, I don't know why I can't change the features. So right now, you guys can only send your answers to the host. So nevertheless, if you guys have any questions to the lecturer today, Sister Abeda, feel free to share it with me, and we'll ask those questions in the Q&A part of this seminar today, in the end of the seminar today, inshallah. Throughout this session, I will also share some beneficial resources for all of you that you guys can benefit from when it comes to our movement and organization, a WhatsApp group for some of ISIP-related groups for discussions and research sharing, and other beneficial resources as well. So please forgive us for the technical issues, the logistic issues, and also for the issues with regards to Zoom, and also sending the emails with the registration link, etc. All right, let's start the lecture today, dear brothers and sisters. Today's lecture will be with Sister Abeda Ahmad from the UK. We're very honored to host her. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I have personally connected with her many times, and we're very excited that she's giving out of her precious time to share her expertise and experience with us, inshallah. The theme and the topic of the lecture will be addiction, Islam, and family life. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All right, today's agenda will be that we just recite Surah Al-Fatiha together, just to get the blessings and barakah for the session from Allah Azza wa Jal. After that, we will just go through some guidelines and some information. And also, as I referred to earlier, please send your questions in the chat, just direct and directly to me as host. The lecture will be with Ustad Abeda Ahmad, and after that, we will do some forms and closing du'as as well. The Zoom etiquette, the same as usual, dear colleagues. Please have your cameras on if you want. It's always nice to see each other, And you can use the gallery view, which is a feature that Zoom allows. No recording or screenshots are allowed. The recording will be shared on ISIP YouTube channel within a couple of days after this presentation, inshallah. And also keep muted at all times. This is just for allowing us to conduct this seminar and webinar as swift and smooth as possible. I earlier told you guys, if you guys would like to rename yourself, that would be great. And utilize the chat option. I already mentioned that today it doesn't work, unfortunately. Hopefully we will resolve it to our next lecture, but add all of your questions or reflections to me personally. And finally, if you need any live transcription, please press the More button in the lower end of the Zoom application and request for that. And inshallah, we will give you access to that as well. Please mute yourself, dear brothers and sisters, when you join. We would really appreciate it. Jazakallah khair. All right, dear brothers and sisters, a little bit about ISIP. So ISIP, the International Students of Islamic Psychology, we're trying to be an inclusive space designed to connect people with diverse backgrounds interested in Islamic psychology and Muslim mental health. We aim to disseminate knowledge, share resources, and discuss best practices in a free and accessible manner. So whatever we do in ISIP, we try to make it free so that everybody, no matter which social economical background they have, can benefit from the sacred knowledge of Islamic psychology. We also want to be a platform to enable further development of people's personal and professional interests, understanding, studies of Islamic psychology within their communities or countries of origin. Please mute yourself, brothers and sisters, when you join. If you can mute yourself, we would really appreciate it. Thank you. So ways that you guys can connect to join our movement and organization. We have WhatsApp groups for discussions and resource sharing, Islamic psychology groups. Feel free to join these, and the links will be shared in the Zoom chat by myself throughout the session today, inshallah. You can also become a member of ISIP, which is free of charge, via our website at www.isip.foundation, where you can also get access to our digital library with over 1,000 resources related to Islamic psychology and Muslim mental health, organized by our amazing colleagues and volunteers within the movement. And this is, of course, free of charge. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. This lecture today will be added there. We have over 300 lectures currently in over 10 different languages, conducted by all of our different local and regional chapters. We have over 30 local and regional chapters all around the world. So if you guys want to join our local and regional chapters, we will share how you guys can join. If there is no ISIP chapter in your country or region, feel free to reach out to us as well. And we'll be more than delighted to establish that under your excellent contribution and leadership, dear brothers and sisters. And finally, we follow us on social media. Our Instagram, our other handles will be shared in our YouTube channel link and the Zoom chat throughout the session. All right, this is just a QR code for our Islamic psychology group. Feel free to use it if you find it beneficial. And now we're going to go to the main person of this lecture today, Ustada Abeda Ahmad. She is the founder of Amanah Counselling. She has a master's degree in development studies and English literature. And she is a relational counselor, relational counselor, as well as a CEDR Accredited Mediator. She has extensive experience of working with individuals and families, especially those who have children with special needs and disabilities. She's also an accredited approachable parenting facilitator, and Ustada Abeda has recently specialized in sex addiction counseling from the Institute of Sex Addiction Training, becoming the first Muslim counselor in the United Kingdom to have this qualification. So leave your feedback as well, dear brothers and sisters. Your feedback, and please mute yourself when you join, brothers and sisters, please. Thank you so much. So we would love your feedback in Nasiha on how we can better our initiatives. So use this QR code, and the link to the feedback form will also be shared in the Zoom chat. And please forgive us for any shortcomings. Make dua for us, and please fill out, as I mentioned, the feedback form in the end. Without any further ado, let me just stop sharing my screen now. So most welcome, dear Sister Abeda. The floor is yours. An honor to have you with us. Bismillah.
Sister Abeda. Allah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly. Please go ahead, Ustad.
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here this afternoon. I make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this beneficial for everybody, inshallah. And I'm really hoping that
there's an African-American song, 19th.
We can all learn from each other, inshallah. And towards the end of the presentation, obviously, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys will have for me, inshallah. So I think I want to start by just introducing myself. Jazakallah khair, Brother Jamaluddin, for saying all the kind words that you did for me. And I think since that update from the website, I've kind of done a few more things. So I also work with psychosexual issues with couples, alhamdulillah, and I also do some trauma work as well. And the reality is that as human beings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us complex creations. We're obviously lofty in terms of our muqam, but at the same time, we're quite complicated. So if I just tell you a little bit about my background. So I've been a psychotherapist for almost 20 years now, alhamdulillah. And I started off my journey with Relate. So Relate is, for those of you who are not based in the UK, Relate, basically, it's a UK-wide organization, and we specialize in relationships. So we work with individuals, we do couples work, and then we do family work as well. Within Relate, all these years, in the last 20 years especially, I noticed that they were very few and far between Muslim practitioners, and especially Muslim practitioners who really kind of put Islam in the forefront of their lives. So for me, that was something that I've always felt was very missing. So hence I started my private practice, and it's almost been 15 years now, alhamdulillah, that I have my own private practice in the West Midlands. In terms of thinking about why do I speak about addiction, and especially why do I speak about sex and pornography addiction, and that is my niche area. Obviously, anybody who works with addiction understands that the baseline in terms of how addiction affects our brain chemistry, more or less it's the same thing. But for me, my specialism is sex and pornography addiction, and that's going to be something that I will be discussing here with you guys today. Now, in terms of thinking about why I started doing that, so my oldest couple that I've ever worked with is a 65-year-old man, and they were married for 30 years. And when they came to me, obviously they came for marital discord, but very soon into the therapy, we noticed that there were issues that were related to pornography addiction. And for me, that is so inspiring in terms of the fact that we kind of, when we think about therapy and counseling, we kind of really feel that it's a very Eurocentric thing. It's very obviously European or Western, and which is very true in terms of the way we are taught how to do psychotherapy or how to be counselors. But the reality is that if it is conducted in a way which suits our clients, our community, I feel that we can really break those barriers and make a really impactful difference in people's lives. So as I said, that the Western model that we have is very colonized, it's very Eurocentric, and for us, it's very away from our fitri position, because any type of learning that doesn't include our kind of connection, our spiritual connection, and our way of life, it just doesn't sit right. So anything that doesn't sit right, you can't really internalize or make a meaningful difference with that. So for me, again, that's something very important. And today I will briefly touch upon some of that as well, inshallah, in terms of my model of working and how do I find it useful. I also want to say that when it comes to kind of really thinking about our work as Muslim practitioners, and one thing I just wanted to ask here, I should have done that in the start, is that our people who have joined us on this platform today mostly therapists, or Brother Jamal, can you tell me as to
we have a different, our members are mental health professionals, scholars, students, just layperson, people that are interested. So it's a very diverse professional background. So yeah. Jazakallah khair, sister.
Shukran for that. I think that's quite important, isn't it, to just understand, because when we speak to specific colleagues who are actually delivering therapy, I think in the way we see things is slightly different. But one thing which is common is that as people, when we are interacting with others, whether it's our clients or our family members or whatever, when we are imparting nasiha or giving therapy, in a Eurocentric model, it's confidential. It's a relationship between two individuals. Whereas Islamically, any kind of interaction we have with our clients, we are always so cognizant of the fact that it's not just two people. Obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always present, and that's the focal kind of central point for our work as Muslim practitioners, and that's something that very, very it's important to always remember that, inshallah. So I'm hoping that by the end of this session today, we will all kind of agree. I'm sure we all understand that anyway, but just want to reiterate that any addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol or pornography is a mental health issue. I believe that it's not a spiritual or moral failing. And it's really important that when we think about healing, we think about it to be holistic, which has to, for us Muslims, it has to have a spiritual lens, and absolutely important that we also consider the trauma. Because for me, I suppose I would say 95% of the clients that I've worked with over the last 20 years, if they've had addiction issues, there would always be adverse childhood experiences or some sort of trauma. I also feel that as a community, we need a lot of compassion and empathy. And that's, alhamdulillah, I would say that it's gradually improving. Definitely seen a huge change in the last 5 years, mashallah. And that's purely because of the beautiful work that our colleagues are doing. May Allah reward them. And just, you know, being able to speak about things in a more open and inclusive platform, I think that's an amazing thing. And like I said, that it's important that when we think about addiction, we understand the impact of the ACEs, which are the adverse childhood experiences, and also think about what does addiction do to the family, and then obviously the generational impact as well. I would want to start just by a gentle reminder, which is beautiful, that our Prophet ﷺ used to teach us to, when we would go and see somebody who's unwell, he would tell us to make this, start off with this application where he would teach us to say, praise to be Allah, who has saved me from what he has inflicted on them, and who has honored me over many of his creations. And I think that is, it's such a humbling place to start. And that means that when we start, there is no this, so we're not better than anybody else. Our clients, people that are struggling, you know, they're just like us, and may Allah protect us all. And it's a reminder when Ibn Qayyim says that whoever shames his brother for a sin, he will be tested with the same sin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all. And I found that as a tool in terms of, you know, when we start off with working assessment and all that, what I always find quite useful is when I remind myself of that, reminding my clients that in terms of our difficulties, we all have different challenges, and these are our mujahidas, these are our different struggles that we all go through. So somebody might be struggling with pornography addiction, you know, somebody else might have something else, but only Allah knows deep down, you know, what people are going through. Okay, so what I want to start with is a little case study. Now, Brother Jamal, are you, sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to ask you, so are you telling me that people won't be able to interact with me, or would they be able to?
We do actually, we don't do open microphones because of the amount of people, and sometimes it becomes, so people can write their questions in the chat.
Okay, so they can interact through the chat?
No, the chat, they can interact because the chat is not working right now. So I'm trying to fix it. There's a feature, I don't know how to fix it. So they can write to me in the chat. I will address it. If there are any questions, I will address it in the Q&A to you, inshallah.
Okay, all right. So we'll have to work with what we have. No problem. Jazakallah khair. There has to be a good reason for that as well, inshallah. So we accept that. Okay, so I just wanted to start off with this little case study, inshallah. And the reason why I wanted to present this case study at the start is just for us to kind of have a flavor as to what we see on the surface and what is actually underneath the surface. And obviously, as therapists, we are kind of really trained and disciplined to do that. So we do quite a lot of history taking, and it's a kind of really gentle process. So that's why we kind of train not to jump to conclusions or make any kind of rash decisions about, you know, the people that we're working with. So obviously names have been changed. This case study, as we do with case studies, all case studies, is that we take the situation, but we obviously use fake names to protect the identity of our clients. So Saqib is somebody who has a pornography addiction. He's 34 years old. He works from home, and according to his wife Sana, Saqib comes across as very controlling. He insists that she wears the niqab. He has opinions on the choice of colors and clothes that he wears. He doesn't like big, bold patterns and colors. He's loving towards her and the children. I think they have 3 children. And he's practicing. He has good ambitions for his children. He wants them to be good practicing Muslims. In terms of his presentation and affect, he disassociates very often. And when it comes to arguments, can escalate. So a little thing can become very big and complicated in their dynamic. Now, recently, what has happened is that there was an altercation where they were arguing, and he pushed her. She admits that she was, in terms of a language, she used foul language, and the police was called. And at that point, obviously, the police was called, and then he was taken away. And then they were at the stage where they're trying to rebuild their relationship. According to Sana, she feels that he can be quite narcissistic, misogynistic, and controlling. Okay, so I just want you to maybe spend a second or two, a minute or two, just to gather your thoughts as to what do you think? How would you, if you were to come across somebody like this, or somebody shared a story like this, immediately, what would you think about this person in terms of who they are, and especially focusing on the last 3 kind of narcissistic, misogynistic, and controlling. So when you hear about that somebody might be narcissistic, misogynistic, and controlling, what does that mean to people? So there's stuff in the chat. Can I see the chat as well?
Well, I don't know what happened with the feature, sister. There's something wrong today. So
so there's stuff in the chat.
So everybody write to me in the chat, and I will address them to Sister Abeda. So write to me, and I will. So somebody's writing, seems like someone inspired by alpha male ideology.
Okay.
That is a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Feel free to share your comments. And brothers and sisters, please forgive. Our Zoom chat is always open. People know, because we love the chat. Well, I don't know what it is, so we'll fix it.
It's one of those things. Maybe I can discuss this, Jamal, while people are typing.
You're typing here ACE and low self-esteem. Jafar wrote.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Cultural norms.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Jazakallah khair for that.
I was also thinking about cultural norms in a sense.
Absolutely. Okay.
These are some of the reflections from the chat.
Jazakallah. Okay. So I'm just going to move on and kind of tell you guys about, okay, so let's look at the case study now.
Some other comments as well, Sister Abeda. This man needs help with counseling first, and some who is wounded and self-absorbed.
That's a really good point. Jazakallah khair for that. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about this couple. So Saqib's dad was 76, still alive, mom 68, and he has 2 older sisters, then a brother, then a sister, then another sister, then another sister, and then another sister, and then he's the youngest. Now his parents had an extremely difficult and very volatile marriage. His mom obviously went through, mashallah, all these children, may Allah bless her, but then she had 3 miscarriages, and she lost a baby as well who was 6 months old. Saqib's father obviously must have his own traumas. He's always been, throughout his life, very disassociated. The way he's been kind of presented as somebody who was there but not there. So in effect, Saqib was basically raised by his siblings, mostly his sisters. When he was 6 years old, he was taken to their country of origin because there was difficulty between mom and dad, and he was there for a year. And in that 1 year, he was sexually abused by an older cousin who was a teenager at the time. So Saqib was 6, this boy must have been 12 or 13. And it wasn't a one-off thing. Obviously, he was there for a year, and that kind of abuse was very consistent. And also there was a lot of bullying going on from that person control and all that. So when he came back, he's kind of integrating back into the school. School was difficult. Secondary school was extremely challenging. He was bullied at school. And towards the end of secondary school, I think just before he was finishing secondary school, he stumbled upon pornography through playground and magazines and whatnot. And from there, he got hooked on to pornography. His kind of attachment with his dad was, obviously there wasn't much going on with his mom. He was kind of really seeked connection with his mom, but his mom had her own kind of inability, disassociation. She wasn't available. All the sisters were, their spouses were people who kind of semi-forced marriage, kind of arrange, whatever you want to call these relationships. Obviously, we understand that not all arranged marriages are forced marriages, and we just respect and appreciate that. But in this incident, there was kind of this whole disconnect in terms of how the males were, because he was very young. So although he just had one brother, all these males in his life were people who came from their country of origin. And there's a kind of a clear mismatch, because these sisters were born and raised here. The men that came, kind of a lot of relational rupture, which he witnessed. So that's his background, and kind of really thinking about what does that do to a person. So for him, because of his own inability to never speak to anybody about his trauma, obviously, his way of dealing with his trauma was pornography addiction. So now just putting a definition out there for you guys in terms of what do we classify, what is addiction? So we know that addiction is seen as a brain disease. And the important thing to remember is that it is a relapsing brain disease. And the important thing is also to recognize that there is the element of compulsivity. So people need to, the drug seeking and usage kind of, it's kind, you know the harmful consequence, but you can't stop. Now, it's also important to recognize that when there is a change to the brain structure, when people are constantly using addictive substances, and the same goes for any type of addiction, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or pornography. And these brain changes, they can have a long-lasting impact on the person's behavior. And for us, it's important that we understand as practitioners in terms of what is the neuroscience behind addiction. It's also important to understand the concept of dopamine as to what does dopamine do to the brain, because one of the common denominators between all addictions is dopamine. And it's also important to understand the concept of neuroplasticity, alhamdulillah, which is a beautiful, amazing, and such a reassuring concept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us such that our brains can rewire. And with practice, with working in terms of mujahida and constantly working, people can, alhamdulillah, come away from addiction, which is a humbling and a beautiful thought. So just to tell you guys as to what happens to our brain and how do we become addicted to, especially to sex and pornography. So as I said, the common denominator between all addictions is the need to seek dopamine. Now, dopamine basically is a chemical which gives us an instant pick me up kind of a feel. So when people are using pornography or any other type of addictive substance to feel okay, that means that they are going to, if they're feeling depressed, if they have a conflict, if they're unhappy, if they're sad, and they are hooked now to pornography or to something else, that's what they will go back to that to create stability or to create temporary release from whatever is happening around them. So we do understand that our clients who struggle with addiction, this is their faulty coping strategy. Now, obviously, life is difficult. Everybody has challenges, and with very few people who would say that they don't have any adverse childhood experiences, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put us on this earth, and this as a form of test. This place is to test us, really. We understand that. But the reality is that how people cope with those things, obviously everybody's different, and everybody's situation in terms of what is around them is very, very different. So we understand that dopamine seeking behavior is not what the client, the addict would want. It becomes what they need. And that's the classic thing that so it's important to recognize that they cognitively, spiritually, socially would know that the choice that they are making is really detrimental. So they don't want it, but they need it. And that's obviously the dependency. And now we all now know that in terms of the diversity and the range of things that people can get addicted to is, subhanAllah, it's ever increasing, isn't it? I don't think 10, 15 years ago, we would have thought that social media would be a thing that people can get addicted to, or gaming could be a thing. Now, in the UK, within NHS, obviously now, gaming is a recognized form of addiction, and young children are obviously badly hooked on to gaming, but the pattern and the brain dependencies remains the same. As I said, that it's important to recognize that if we kind of really peel the layers, we understand that addiction, it's a nervous system response. So our nervous system, as we all know, that if we are in our safety mode, then our fight-flight response, our need to seek safety, people have, again, faulty coping strategies. So one of the things that those who have issues with addiction is that their nervous system kind of latches on straight to seeking dopamine to feel safe. And that becomes a nervous system response. People also use addiction to regulate their emotions. So, and I see that a lot because many of my couples that I work with this, because that's my niche area, a lot of people, because the way I split my work is that if somebody comes and they have, through the assessment, if we find out that they have pornography addiction, for instance, and the spouse knows, or if they have sex addiction and the spouse knows, in terms of how do you manage the relationship. So then I split my practice in the sense that I do some one-to-one work with the addict. Then I do some work with the couple as well, because to sustain the relationship, because that's very, very important. And alhamdulillah, the amazing thing is that with the right support, these relationships can thrive and function. So, and that's really important that us as a community, we recognize that if we put in place the right intervention and know how to support these people, then we can save relationships and marriages and kind of really work on minimizing the generational trauma for these families. So coming back to this, we also know that, again, addiction, use of addiction, any type of a drug or pornography is a coping strategy, and it's a anesthetizing tool. So people would use this to dumb down the pain and the difficult emotions. Now, in terms of thinking about the model that we use in terms of classification, so there are 3 possible or 4 possible kind of ways as to how people get hooked on, especially to pornography. So one of the things could be that, especially for young people, they just are exposed to something, and especially with pornography, because it is so freely accessible, it's here. So that's it. You just find it on the phone or on your laptop or anything, because it's free. It's anonymous, nobody knows, it's accessible, and that's how people start off. But we also know that not everybody who watches something once would want to go back and go again and again, and that's also the reality. Although now the research it's just shocking in terms of opportunity, that the age is kind of decreasing. So I think a few months ago I read that a 4-year-old was able to kind of get into the phone and send something inappropriate from his phone to somebody else or whatever. That's a 4-year-old. So that's something to think about. And we talk about this a lot in terms of the parenting work that we do, that how do we kind of really protect our children from accessibility and opportunity. And then we think about opportunity and attachment. So people who have attachment deficits, so they don't really have good attachment from their childhood, that also makes them very vulnerable. And at the same time, people who have trauma are more vulnerable. And a lot of clients that I work with would have a combination of attachment and trauma and opportunity. So if you think about the case study that I shared with you, obviously, Saqib had, he was introduced through friends, and then because of his vulnerability, his ACEs, his adverse childhood experiences, and his trauma made him somebody who would stay stuck. So why? And that's the difference. If there is attachment and trauma, then the opportunity will make you more vulnerable. Whereas if Allah blesses you with a secure attachment, or if you have not exposed to trauma, then the chances are that children would watch something, they would just not like it or whatever, because our fitra is not inclined towards, and our fitra as young children understand, and they don't necessarily jump towards something that's not nice. There's always a cringe or a uncomfortable feeling. And in our parenting programs, we talk a lot about protective behaviors. How do you nurture those protective behaviors and good boundaries? So we raise children who are equipped in understanding how to know what's not so good for them and what's good for them. And rather than parents telling them telling them what's good and what's not good, obviously that's our role as parents, but I think it's kind of really developing those tools and those innate qualities, inshallah ta'ala. So when we talk about ruptured relationships and think about the impact, I suppose one of the things that this was probably the thing that pushed me now over 10 years ago, kind of really thinking about I need to do something and get trained into becoming a sex and pornography addiction therapist. And as a practicing person coming from quite a traditional background, I had to really make an informed decision, kind of really thinking about the fact that I was working with clients who would come to me for their relationships and struggling with addiction and not being able to say it to anybody. And that was very, very sad. So the couple that I mentioned in the beginning, who was in their 60s, they had spent 35 years of their married life just struggling with this issue. And it's just very sad to see these people struggling. And then if you don't have the right tools, because there's only so much you can self-teach. Alhamdulillah, you can. But for me, I felt that I really needed to know exactly how to deal with it. So that pushed me to go and seek the training, because the fractured relationships can lead to so much trauma. We know for sure that our children, no matter what we teach them, what we do in front of them is what they then to do. So the type of parents we are, no matter what we say to them, they will notice what we're doing. So kind of that generational transmission. And I also noticed that in terms of what this was doing to relationships, and this is obviously documented evidence that people who have addiction, especially pornography and sex addiction, they tend to become very isolated, because deep down, obviously, they're carrying a lot of shame. And that isolation obviously propels and makes more mental health issues for these people. Then obviously there's always the financial cost and burden. And again, I don't know many people who are struggling with addiction and they don't have any other mental health issues. The common ones would often be depression and anxiety, and they can be very debilitating, obviously. Now, in terms of thinking about what happens to an addict, and how do we kind of frame that, and when we start working with with the client, I suppose it's really so important to recognize that the relationship with the self, and that's what I often start with, because we know that the more we kind of weed out, address and acknowledge the issues with the self, the more we can help our clients. And it's also an opportunity for spiritual growth and personal growth as well. So this is where we kind of really think about the concept of addressing the inner child wounds, the concept of reparenting. And that's so profound in terms of giving the person the opportunity that, okay, your parents have made mistakes, parents are people. How do you now, the deficit, you know, the traumas and stuff that you've endured, how do you now be kind to yourself and connect with yourself? So with that, there's a very important concept that we learned from Iqbal, who is an amazing philosopher and poet from the East, from Pakistan. Subcontinent, I should say, because he was there before Pakistan was born. So his concept of khudi, which is an amazing concept, which is very spiritually rooted, which I use a lot to inform my clients in terms of how do they develop the sense of self, the inner resiliency, and knowing that the addiction is not the whole personality. Addiction is part of their personality, and it's a small thing that we need to work with and deal with. It doesn't define them, which is very important. Then the client's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you cannot really, in terms of working with the client, and that's not an imposition, I must say that, depending on where the client is, if they are spiritually inclined and they want to, then you utilize this as an anchoring tool, spirituality as an anchoring tool, and then kind of really redefining their relationship with Allah, because don't forget that for a lot of people, their relationship with Allah is very kind of authoritarian and like this, which has to be. I appreciate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is he's the king, you know, he's our sovereign. So it has to be like that. But in terms of emotionally, if it's a very negative relationship, then the fear of retribution would lead the client to be very evasive and avoidant. So you will have to spend a lot of time kind of really building that positive relationship and connecting with mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes of being Rahman and Rahim. Because if somebody has an attachment issue and they are very avoidant, and their understanding of spirituality is based on that avoidance, no matter what you say to them, you can share all the stories from the Quran, which are a really important resource. You can, quote a lot of spiritual stories. But if their attachment style is problematic, then it would just wash over them. It wouldn't really have the impact that we want it to have. So it's important to identify and really assess, what is their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then also kind of thinking about their relationship with the family. If the relationships around them are extremely dysfunctional and there's a lot of rupture, then finding ways of repairing some of those things. And I know you guys might be saying, well, this is a lot of work. How do we do that? But the reality is that we know that therapy is like fine combing. It's like kind of really trying to unknot the knots, which comes from Allah, obviously, and nobody else. But it's important to recognize that if the addict is living in a household where there is a lot of constant conflict, there's a lot of toxicity, and people don't know how to regulate their emotions, they don't know how to communicate, then it would be very difficult. So finding time and really, and that's where the history is very important, doing good genograms, and being quite curious and interested in all the significant people's stories, really, because the more you explore that work, and the more client starts healing, the more the social kind of the construct changes, then you start reframing, and people start noticing that everybody has their own kind of reason. So, and that's quite healing in a sense, that you're not making excuses for people. You're trying to understand with compassion and empathy as to why is a person behaving the way they behave. Because spiritually, we all know, and that's our belief, that everybody is born okay, Allah, as the Prophet ﷺ said, we are born on a fitra. So then these stories and these kind of this curiosity and this unpicking allows people to have compassion and understanding. So the work with the family, and this does not mean that every therapist has to be a family therapist. This just means that with your one-to-one client or your couple or whoever you're supporting in whatever capacity, whether it's a friend or a client, understanding of the family dynamics is extremely important. And I understand that with some modalities, you know, when you come out of your training, if it's person-centered or whatever, when we start off practicing as practitioners, we can be very tunnel visioned, and we just want to work with the modality that we trained in. But the reality is that human beings are such complex phenomena. One modality cannot be so useful. So it's important to allow yourself to learn different skills. So kind of polishing your own knowledge and understanding of different modalities and way of working is extremely important. Now, obviously, in terms of thinking about the wider the impact of the society and how the person is engaging with the society and the environment, or when I say society, is kind of really, if you think about the inner circle, the person in the center, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the family, and then the wider environment, which could be the society, could be the neighbors, the colleagues, the work people, or whatever. And also, as we know that we have different parts that we take with, and in different situations, a different part will show up. And I know that, and I'm sure people who are here who work in therapy would know that our clients can tell us that they would, in terms of their, for instance, in their work capacity, who they come across would be somebody very different to who they are at home in terms of their ability to manage things. And that is because their kind of exile emotions, or when they are triggered, their shame or their anger or all those things will take over, and they don't have the capacity to then be confident and curious and compassionate and all the good things that holds us, and those are scaffolds. So it's important to see how this person is in terms of their extended network. And then finally, obviously, in terms of our clients' relationship with the environment, and our environment is that we connect when we think about our environment with nature and the wider kind of just being us here on this earth. I think that's very important, that if clients are very disassociated and kind of really in a tight bubble, then that's problematic, because in terms of healing, although obviously as in our capacity, we do a lot of talking, and that's our tool, talking therapy. But holistically speaking, we know that mindfulness, a kind of connecting with the nature, or how we soothe our nervous system and all that. So kind of really psychoeducating our clients, especially those who are struggling with addiction, is important, that their relationship with the environment is assessed and then improved, inshallah ta'ala. So looking at the impact, and I can understand that maybe some of these things are stating the obvious, but the reality is that when a lot of these people, especially people who have pornography addiction, they tend to then, as a coping strategy, what they have to do is, or what then they do is, they choose to disassociate, in the sense that their coping strategy, because of shame and guilt, it's almost that you disassociate, and then you come from a place where you minimize things. And cognitive distortions, as we know, whether that's minimization or whether that's kind of really just focusing on the negatives, whatever, the cognitive dissonance allows people to carry on. So people then tend to just keep lying, keep cheating, and that kind of cycle, that you lie because you don't, in your mind, you might say, oh, I'm just lying, it's just a white lie, because what's the point? If I tell my wife, she would be upset, so it's better if I don't tell her that I did that. So, or if people, unfortunately, with sex addiction, if they have compulsivity, they're just, going to escorts or doing whatever they're doing, sex workers or what, they would say to me, oh yeah, but it was just meaningless. I love my wife. I respect her. So what's the point of telling her? I don't want to tell her because she would just be upset. and all those things really. But the reality is that that's when you kind of really think about explaining to the clients as to what happens when you constantly do things that are spiritually eroding. And again, that's without judgment. I use a lot of stones, so I have stones around the room. Can't see where they are now, but kind of just explaining what our heart looks like when it's not stained and darkened, and then what happens when we constantly these spiritual kind of dots, negative dots of making really bad choices, promiscuous choices, what happens. So it's important to address that in the sessions without judgment. And then if you think about the impact on the family, and we'll look at what happens, especially to the spouses, because again, with the pornography addiction and sex addiction, what most people tend to do, in my experience, is that if it's another addiction, for instance, if it's drugs or if it's alcohol, people find out very quickly, because it's very difficult for a drug addict to hide what happens to their moods and how they present themselves. So people can try and protect them, but sooner or later it comes out and everybody knows. So that's very different. But when it comes to pornography addiction, it's easy to hide. So people can be, there is absolutely no way for other people to find out. So I work obviously with people who are medics, and I mean, obviously any addiction doesn't discriminate, but obviously I've worked with people who are Hafid al-Quran, who are doctors, who are teachers, who are lawyers, all sorts really, and women as well. So it's not that it doesn't affect women. And obviously these people are parents, and they are very, very nurturing in terms of their commitment to their family. So we need to understand that's not really, because, and that's why it's harder to catch and to treat, because with other things, people will just gather there are more obvious, there's more obvious need for intervention. Whereas with pornography addiction, obviously people can be suffering in silence for 20 years, 30 years, whatever, because people don't find out. Now more and more research is telling us that there is a possibility of some kind of genetic contribution when it comes to addiction. But for me, I think I also believe that obviously the main important thing is the environmental contribution. That why do, and now I've done this long enough to see this in practice really often, that grandparents, parents, and then children, what's going on, why is it transmitting really? And then you think about if the kind of the emotional and social things are facilitated, then your coping strategies become the same. So whatever you've seen your elders doing, you kind of feel that, it makes sense to you as well. So, and that's the thing, that individuals who grow up with parents and see they're struggling with addictions, then it's likely that they will tend to have problems. And I think there was a big research, I can't remember exactly now, I don't have the reference, but the kind of 3-generational impact of how it was transmitted in terms of from generation down to generation. Now, this is an area that I'm extremely passionate about. And like I said, when I take on clients, I make sure that if they're coming as couples, I kind of, so the contract would be that I would do some separate work with the addict, but then also try and support the spouse as much as I can, because I feel that it's extremely, extremely difficult for the spouses, and they tend to suffer in silence, and it really is extremely debilitating for the marriage, because for their role, as when you try, when people understand that addiction is a mental health issue, I think for them it becomes a huge burden, because then they are expected to now be in a supportive role, almost nurse their spouse, who is, as far as they feel and they're concerned, who is abusing them, in a sense that they are having extramarital affairs or whatever they're doing, or watching stuff that is not permissible. And obviously it really impacts, as a psychosexual therapist, I know that it impacts their intimacy. there is something called erectile dysfunction, or all those things that can happen in terms of desire and all the other problems that can happen in their bedroom, and which is so poisonous and problematic for the marriage. So there has to be, again, as therapists, we have to, if we don't have the capacity or the tools to support the spouse ourselves, as part of the contracting or working and a treatment plan, it's important to signpost the spouse so then they can have some one-to-one help themselves. Very, very important. Now, as a community, and I think this is vital, that we think about the role of the extended family, because again, for us Muslims, it's really very important that we recognize that everybody has responsibility. So the role of the parents, the grandparents, and other people around the addict, they come and support without judgment, because one of the feedbacks that I get, both from the families with addiction, if they are found out, or with the families with special needs children, for instance, that the community, as a community, people are very, very judgmental and harsh, and these people would say, we're not often invited to weddings because our children can be quite disrupted, or so there's that stigma, and then there's obviously that isolation. So I think as a community, our attitude needs to change, inshallah ta'ala. So what I often say to the spouses is that the spouses need to learn and educate, and it makes a huge difference. And I noticed that when they come in the first session, there's a lot of anger and resentment and frustration and upset and hurt. And obviously you provide space for people to do their catharsis and, offload or whatever. But then the more you explain things and educate, the more people understand that there can be a separation. Okay, this is a mental health issue. This is not for me. This is not my fault. Because spouses, they lose a lot of self-esteem and confidence, especially with pornography addiction. What's missing in me that my husband needs to go and do this? So to kind of really work through all those vulnerable emotions. So the 3 C's are that the spouse needs to know that they have not created this. So it's important to understand that this is, I'm so sorry. I did try, but I'm sorry, I don't know how to disconnect so I'm a dinosaur, so you guys will have to forgive my lack of IT skills. So my apologies for that disruption. So the 3 C's are the spouse to understand that they have not created this problem. They cannot control this problem. And they have to understand that it's not their creation. This person had a problem before they came on. It's not like, oh, you don't pay attention to me, so I have to watch this or whatever. So no, and they cannot heal this, and neither can they control this. So that's important too. They cannot control, they cannot cure, and they have not created this. So those are the 3 C's. And like I said, it's important for the spouse to know that they have to get help for themselves as well. So you can't pour from an empty cup. It's important that the spouse, even if they see their role as a nurturing kind of supportive role, they have to nurture themselves and find their own support network as well. In terms of stability in the relationship, so if there is constant chaos in the household for the children and for the spouse, any environment that's constant high in emotion, and as we say, the emotions and high, if emotions are high, the cognition is low, recipe for disaster. So creating stability, kind of really thinking about what do we need to do if there's conflict. So simple things as conflict resolution and management, teaching those skills. Now, not enabling is very, very important, because sometimes people, just because they don't want this whole stigma about staying in a toxic relationship, is that you would enable and facilitate, and which is problematic, because I mean, obviously, as a relationship therapist, 95% work I would say that I would want to fix and mend a relationship, but then obviously at some point you have to recognize no, and then that's when you change from doing marriage work to mediation to separate. And that's very important to recognize, when is enough enough. That's extremely important as professionals. We realize when do we draw a line and say, no, we need to now think about other things. There needs to be a plan B, because can't be you just be patient, and just patience, obviously, as we all know spiritually, we understand that it's an active state. And with regards to recovery and healing, we have to have realistic expectations, because healing does not look like that. People improve, then they have slips, sometimes relapses, then they kind of really start developing their tools again. And then we have to have realistic expectations, because otherwise it's extremely disappointing and disheartening that somebody's sober or not acted out for 6 months and then they had a relapse. So it's devastating for them, and obviously for their spouse as well. So it's important that people take care of themselves, as I said. So with the children, Brother Jamal, can you tell me how we're doing for time? Because I haven't kept an eye on the clock.
Oh, interesting. So let's continue. We enjoy it. There's a lot of questions in the chat. We generally have 90 minutes for the whole session, including Q&As. How many minutes do you have left, Sister Abeda?
I don't. Maybe 10 minutes with the presentation.
Yeah. So inshallah, we'll do 10 minutes, and we will shorten the Q&As. We will do like 3-4 questions. Actually.
Okay, just don't want to be rude and but take
advantage
of kindness. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Please go ahead, Ustad. Jazakallah.
Shukran. So now thinking about what happens to our children. So the children who are raised in a household where they're addicts. So these are some of the traits which children would see tendencies in them. So depression and anxiety, and this I know because I do a lot of parenting work, and you notice that families where they have conflict, which obviously could would come from addiction as well, that children tend to be more anxious and depressed as well. And in terms of how they regulate their emotion, they don't know how to express healthy emotions. So those of you who understand the concept of transactional analysis, and we look at a child ego, and we say an adaptive child versus a free child. So an adaptive child who is always hypervigilant, conscious, needs validation from others for safety and security, will as an adult have huge issues in their relationships. So they can never be really comfortable with who they are. And those adults then become vulnerable adults in terms of either they are oppressive and abusive towards others, and those terms that are pop psychology is very big on, narcissism and all these things, are people deep down who are adaptive children, basically, because they've never really learned how to soothe and regulate in a wholesome kind of okay manner. And obviously these children, then when they grow up, they have lack of trust. They're always, again, hypervigilant, because lack of trust comes from that the people in an inner circle, adults around them, were showing them that there was lack of trust. So that becomes problematic. And without saying, obviously, it's obvious that they would be hypervigilant. And hypervigilance is the fact that their nervous system is constantly, you're never really regulated as a child. So you're always on edge. So fight or flight ready like that. And you notice that some people are very quick to offend, you say anything and they have a big reaction. And that is because their nervous system is never really on a relaxed kind of a place where they're just being really. So they've become very, very reactive. And that leads to obviously their lack of ability to self-regulate. And again, then because they don't really have the wholesome kind of healthy coping strategies, there's no surprise that they have tendencies towards addiction. So I think I've kind of really talked about some of these things that for us Muslims, obviously, it's important that we have our own way of addressing this. And one of the important things is that we, spiritually speaking, start addressing the cognitive distortions. Thinking about some of the things that I use, and these are just putting this out there, that these are concepts I think most of us, when we become interested in practicing from the spiritual paradigm, we talk about all these things. So these are all concepts that I try and embed in my sessions with my clients. So doing a lot of work around the nafs, also kind of positioning that we put the spirit at the top. So our ruh, and then a heart, and then aql, and then body, and for a lot of people, they've kind of, in the kind of Western paradigm, our mind is seen as very powerful, but the reality is that for me, and I think that's what we learned in our journey through Islamic psychology, is that the heart is the hub and the center. So for when, and to be fair, broken people, and that's probably something that's really important, that these people have really broken hearts, because there's a lot of remorse, and you notice that these are people with beautiful hearts, but they're really broken because of their inability to stop and then stop with their addiction. So the minute you say to a client, look, I can see that you have a really big resource within you, which is that you have a beautiful heart. That means that you really are feeling the impact of the choices that you're making. That means that there's a big resource within you. And that is so empowering for the clients to take that on board. And then these are some of the other concepts that we work through. And also the concept of rida, kind of really contentment, because some of these people, if they're traumatized, kind of really doing some of the trauma work, we kind of really park the past and learn how to move forward, inshallah. So this is just a reminder of a beautiful hadith, which I use a lot, because for me, it makes a lot of sense in terms of how we deal with our clients as a therapist, but also as a community, that obviously for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, compassion comes so naturally and normally. And if a prostitute can be forgiven, subhanAllah, for a small act that came from a beautiful heart, then we have to factor that in all the time. And we've obviously spoken about what the Prophet ﷺ said, and this is the last thing, inshallah, I'll leave you with, that when with our clients, it's important that in terms of accountability, we instill that they have in terms of 3 levels of accountability. Obviously to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but accountability to ourselves, and then the people that we are surrounded with. So Jazakallah khair, thank you so much for your patience. And I'm finding it really difficult to talk. It felt like I was just talking at you, but I understand our limitations. So happy to stop here, inshallah, and then take any questions. Jazakallah khair, shukran.
Jazakallah khairan. Please forgive me for interrupting you. You were saying something. Please forgive me. You were done, Ustad Abeda, or?
No, I was just saying that I felt I have spoken at you, which is not my nature. So I appreciate. I forgive me for that, because we couldn't interact. But
no, not at all, not at all. You, mashallah, I think you spoke to all of our hearts and souls. This is such a important topic indeed, that I think a lot of our colleagues, a lot of our members have been, asking to get more insights about. So I want to give you a round of applause, please. Everybody's thanking you so much in the chat. Everybody's addressing their appreciation. Round of digital applause, dear brothers and sisters. And thank you so much, Ustad Abeda, for this very thorough presentation and lecture about your own important work that you're doing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you tawfiq. What you're doing for families and for marriages and for brothers and sisters is truly admirable. And thank you so much for sharing out of your vast amount of knowledge and experience. And this is really an integrative lecture that you did, where you're integrating the sciences and the studies of psychology with our Islamic faith tradition as well. And this is exactly what we advocate for as ISIP. So thank you so much. Jazakallah khairan, Ustada. We appreciate it so much. There are a lot of questions, so I'm going to go through some of them. And specifically, I'm going to focus on those that are, related to your lecture today. So, for instance, there are some people that are asking, how should I overcome with my social media addiction and addiction as a whole? So these are some people that are writing their own private struggles. Out of respect for their integrity, I'm not mentioning their names. So these are some questions if you would like to just briefly answer. I think you already answered some of it, but yeah, thank you.
Jazakallah khair. I think with any addiction, whether it's social media or any, recognition is the first thing, that we don't minimize it. So Alhamdulillah, I'm really pleased that the person who's asked that question, they're recognizing. So when we recognize, actually, we're taking accountability and we're taking responsibility. So we're not minimizing. So the distortion is gone. So that's a really good thing. In terms of what we can do, obviously, seeking help. I think even if we are at the stage where we don't want talking therapy as going into therapy, I think a small intervention like coaching sometimes where we get practical tools. So with social media, I think one of the things that I say to my clients is that just detox, just say, okay, for a week, I'm not going to go on to social media. And that detox while we are off social media, finding other things, because like I said, addiction gives us dopamine. But there are other ways. So our brain wants to feel okay. If you think about the brain chemistry, want to feel good. So there are other things. So people who gain more time when they're not engaging with their addiction, simple things like half an hour walk, for instance, giving more meaningful and long, prolonged hugs to our people that we love, and finding other hobbies to do. These are little things, because all these other things would give us oxytocins and endorphins and all that pick me up kind of feeling good factors. But if there are underlining stuff, if somebody is really irritated and agitated all the time because they have stuff that they haven't resolved with, so they need to then do some healing work. So I don't know whether that's helpful or not. Jazakallah khair.
MashaAllah, that was great answer. Ustada, thank you so much. Please, brothers and sisters, mute yourself when you join, please. We have lack of time today also, so there's so many questions, and I'm gonna, out of the respect of integrity of some of our members here, I'm not gonna mention the names of the questions either, even though some of the questions are just general questions. I'm still gonna not mention names. So there is another question. So there is somebody asking, can you please explain the 7 trading program from your experience? The 7 trading program.
The 7 what, sorry?
Trading program. I don't know either. Let's move to another question. There's so many questions here. So how can we encourage someone with an addiction to seek therapy? And specifically if they are our parents or higher authoritative role than us?
Yeah, I thank you for that question. I think that's really important, because sometimes generationally we recognize that our parents are sitting on stuff that's hard for them, and they're coming from that place. So what can we do with that? I think first and foremost, identifying a practitioner that the parents can, or the person in that generation can relate to, because that's quite important. That's why we need people who can do bilingual work or whatever. So finding somebody who can match their needs, and then asking them really in terms of, this is not explaining what therapy looks like, because there is a lot of stigma when it comes to talking therapy and mental health, that people think, why would I go and speak to somebody? I'm not crazy or whatever. So normalizing and speaking to the therapist, whether the first session can be a joint session where you just go and, Jamal, when we do our work, what are we doing? We're just talking to people, isn't it? So I think maybe that a bit of hand holding for the first session, and then seeing if they take it to or not, really. That would be a suggestion, inshallah.
That's amazing. And I agree. As a counselor, I think that's to give that safe space for people to be able to share without being judged, and differentiate the action with the person. I think a lot of brothers and sisters who reach out to us generally, they might, as you rightfully said, Ustada, have this sense of spiritually or psychologically bypassing themselves, and also feeling guilt and shame in their actions and behavior. And as soon as they meet somebody like yourself or myself or other colleagues that have a hijab or a beard, and they are not judgmental, rather they're differentiating the action with the person, then that's part of the healing trajectory indeed. So thank you so much for sharing your experience, Ustada. We have here another question. As practitioners, we know the textbook definition of addiction. What is helpful to hear is what were her strategies to help her clients. So how many sessions? What was suggested to get out of porn addiction? Has it made any difference?
Okay, so in terms of the number of sessions, so that's interesting, because if you think about the models like cognitive behavior therapy, you come in and you know that you will be getting 14 sessions, and then in that there is a way of kind of working through that. But I don't think we can put a minimum or maximum number of sessions that we would do with the clients. What I normally do is we start off, so the assessment process, the assessment will take 2 sessions. And then in terms of the strategies and exploring the problems and the strategies and the relapse prevention, because that's very important. So all those things, and that's obviously depending on how the client is working with you, because don't forget, for a lot of people, you might have to spend 2, 3, 4 sessions just getting them to be really open and transparent, because people are not, they don't really like to share stuff that they've done that is not morally acceptable as even for them. So I don't think there can be a maximum number of sessions that everybody is so different. There are clients that have come and gone in 6 months. There are clients that I've worked with for 2 years. Another thing that I need to say to you, that depending on how long has the addiction gone on. So with the assessment, you find out that somebody's been an addict for 3 years. That type of work would look very different to somebody who's done it for 15 years and they have a bigger emotional baggage. Now, what I normally do, alhamdulillah, is that I work quite closely with the 12 steps. So, and I have a good network of brothers who are practicing people who can become the sponsors for some of my clients. I don't know if you're familiar, Jamal, with the 12 steps program. It's a very spiritual-based program, isn't it? I'm sure you understand that. So I think our toolbox needs to be quite diverse, that every client will need something slightly different. Jazakallah khair.
And this 12 steps program is indeed very spiritual, even though it was established by our Christians with regards to, I don't know how to say it in English, but in Sweden, we called it the movement that worked for sobering people, you know, with like primarily alcohol addiction. I was recently going through it with one client, actually, and it is Tawhidi, it is Islamically, like it's so beautiful. The 12 steps. Yeah, it's beautiful. And there's actually there is a brother who has written an Islamicized version of the 12 steps problem. His name is Paul. So we're going to invite him for a lecture soon. So he has done an own approach on the 12 steps program. He's from Scotland, by the way, Paul Pringle, his name is, I think, if I'm not mistaken. An amazing brother. So inshallah, for all of you who would like to see how you can use the 12-step program that Ustad Abeda is doing and utilizing in an Islamic way, feel free to check that resource, inshallah. Thank you so much for sharing. There are so many interesting questions here. What about ADHD? How do you work with people that have ADHD, and perhaps there are some addiction aspects, behavior there as well, and have neurodiversity as well?
So with ADHD, it's interesting that I'm actually at this point working with somebody who has ADHD, and they had marijuana addiction. So it wasn't pornography, but in terms of the first thing with them, what was very useful is for them to get a diagnosis, because they thought they had ADHD, but there was never a diagnosis. So now that they have a diagnosis, I think that's made a huge difference to the marriage in terms of the wife's expectations, because people who have traits of ADHD, how they come across to other people, it can be very difficult, because they can be very impulsive, and how they are, and brain fog, and how they process things, and late to appointments and late to commitments and forgetful, and all those things can be very chaotic to live around with somebody who has ADHD. So I think it's important to get a diagnosis. Now, diagnosis does not give you treatment, but clarity is important. So, and there are tools online that you can use, Jamal, like you can, it's almost, obviously they're not very authentic in that sense, but they give you a clear understanding of what are you struggling with, and what can be the potential diagnosis. So I think getting clarity in terms of diagnosis, and then giving structures and boundaries. So that's what I've found really useful with my clients that I work with ADHD and with addiction, that you do more hand holding in terms of, so the treatment plan for me, then I would say, this is the homework that you have to do for me today. This is the minimum. So it becomes more kind of really directive, if you know what I mean, rather than just letting them get on with it. So I think that's the difference that I've noticed with when it comes to any neurodivergent client as opposed to somebody else. Jazakallah khair.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair for this excellent response, Ustada Abeda. We have another question. How would men feel if women were to respond the same way and say, I love my husband and respect him? Would they think it's acceptable? Just trying to see if any of your clients would see it in the same way if it's the wife who has a porn addiction. This is quite an interesting question because, as I'm sure many of my colleagues have mentioned to me, specifically female colleagues like yourself, Ustad Abeda, that there is a lot of porn addiction among sisters as well. And there is secondary addiction. So maybe they haven't been exposed themselves, but through their husband, they've been exposed as well. So it's a very relevant question. So how would you like to answer that one, Ustad Abeda?
I appreciate what the sister said, and I can see a lot of sadness and frustration because that's exactly what people have said to me in these sessions, you know, that how would he respond if I was doing what he was doing? He would divorce me like that and he would never accept that or whatever. So I appreciate that. And absolutely, the person who asked the question is absolutely right. Can I just say that obviously, in statistically speaking, we see more males. But the reality is that women also have pornography and sex addiction. Now we are coming to know more and more research has been done that people who are paid sex workers, some of them have sex addiction. So they are product of their trauma and their adverse childhood experiences. So it's a very nuanced and complex thing. Now, in the relationship, it becomes very problematic when the person has no accountability. They are not really working with fixing their issue. And there's a lot of blame towards the woman. And she has to then, because of the cultural norms or whatever, and their children, okay, stay suppressed and minimize it and don't tell anybody. And that becomes very problematic and toxic. So I have to say, I appreciate what the sister is saying, absolutely agree with what she said. And there's obviously, there's no way I would accept that as a response. And I would say to the person that you're saying that you respect this person, but then you're making this choice. And that's a dissonance, really. Respect requires something else. So then obviously we start and disclosure and then obviously repairing. So one of the principles from 12 steps, Jamal, is that you have to take accountability for every single action that you've done while under the influence of the addiction, really, and then apologize or do whatever you need to do to ask for forgiveness. So that's where healing comes from, really, for some people.
It's beautiful, beautiful. No, I agree with you, Stada. And the 12 steps program actually reminds me of the different steps of Tawbah. Because when we do Tawbah, we're accountable towards Allah first and foremost. We repent. But then we also ask for forgiveness to those that we have hurt indirectly or directly, you know. So there is accountability on all levels, even though ultimately we seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because human beings might not forgive, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most compassionate. So definitely, there is so much intersections here. Jazakallah khairah. There are so many interesting questions. We'll go through a couple of them. There are some statements as well that is affirming what you're saying. Someone has written, often clients have hyper or hyposexuality, addicted to have almost everyday sexual intercourse and with their partners, and guilt tripping with anger of angels of neglecting the act. And the woman is the garden and you can take from it whatever and whenever you want. Is the treatment of sexual addiction and practicing similar to pornography and masturbation? That's a question there. Many use religious motives to justify hyperactivity, polygamy desires is on these pressures put on women.
Jazakallah khair. That's a really important point. So what I normally, because I do psychosexual work as well. So if there's a lack of desire or if there's a mismatch of desire between the spouses, one person wants a lot all the time, then when you work with all that, then what you realize is what I do when I do my one-to-one sessions with these people is kind of for them to recognize their need for sexual activity even if it's with a spouse. Where is it stemming from? Because you're missing them, you care for them, or you want them, or because you're trying to soothe anxiety or any other kind of emotion. And that's when they start noticing, okay, why do I want this? So, and then the person who asked the question is absolutely right, that this whole spiritual toxicity, in the sense that you would say to somebody that angels will curse you, whatever. And now I think that is long gone. Nobody can throw that and then get away with it in a therapy session, Brother Jamal, you know that, because that's kind of really selectively using the scripture to benefit you. And that's obviously abusive. You cannot do that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful to everybody, really. So I think that psycho-spiritual education, really explaining what the context is, what does that mean? So I appreciate what the person said. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you so much for your answer. And it's so true, because we need to look at different, hadith or different, ayat of the Quran from a jigsaw. Like, okay, there's a statement here, but then there's another statement. So we need to view hadith. And of course, I'm not a faqih. At the end of the day, I'm just reiterating what my teachers has taught me. And that we need to look at different statements of our beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the aspect of a jigsaw, and be holistic towards it. Of course, these are verdicts that we follow, but then you need to look, different statements are saying different things. How do we understand it? Sometimes we just pick one statement from its context, and then we use it for, justifying some actions that are not according to Sunnah, actually, at the end of the day. So this is really important. And also, one thing that we advise is to ask, if you want nasiha and guidance from an imam, a scholar, ask a scholar in your cultural context, because a person from another cultural context might not understand. This is actually standard of all imams that are trained. They always say, you want an advice from me, but if you're not from the context where I'm from, then ask somebody from your context as well. The same goes with understanding counseling, interculturality, cross-culturality is very important indeed in many of these issues. Thank you so much, Ustada Abeda. Then we have here, go ahead, please.
Just with that, I wanted to also add that when we do psychosexual work, when there is mismatch of libidos, kind of really identifying why, what's going on for the person who doesn't want much intimacy, or the other person, then kind of really thinking about other factors, what's going on, whether they are feeling depressed, they're tired, they're exhausted, what's going on for them. And then in terms of how we work through that, so the program that I use is called Sensate Focus, which is about connecting to people. And we understand that spirituality is not just an act, sexuality between spouses is not just an act. Obviously, there's a spiritual dimension to it as well. And there's a lot of psycho-spiritual education that's involved there in terms of what we teach our couples, because don't forget, us as a community, our sex education is appallingly non-existent. That means that a lot of young people, their understanding of sexuality comes from pornography addiction. So in terms of what they expect from each other is just based on rubbish, really. So teaching these people how to connect in a really wholesome spiritual manner is so important, and it really it is so empowering the minute they understand, okay, this is how we're meant to connect before we do the action. Really, there are lots of prerequisites, really. So all that requires a lot of kind of patience and teaching, really. And I think from your platform, I would really hope, inshallah, that we can build resources like that people can use, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakallah.
That's a great nasiha, Ustad. Jazakallah. And actually, that reminds me that we're trying to do this now. So we're establishing something that I would like to share with you, Ustad, and also to all of our members and colleagues here, called the Futuwa Academy of Sacred Manhood and Sacred Womanhood, connecting the tradition of Futuwa, which is chivalrous behavior, noble character traits, to bringing males and females and girls and boys into sacred manhood and sacred womanhood. And in there, we would like to speak about sacred approach towards making love or intimacy as well, and that brothers can educate brothers and sisters can educate sisters, and to have a curriculum. So we're looking at resources, and we will love your nasiha and input, and we will love if you can join us as well, Ustad Abeda. Your participation will be crucial. And for brothers and sisters who are interested in this request from Ustad Abeda and from us, please let us know. We would love you guys to be part of this on the war, and also to have your contributions and reflections in it. I know many of you are very knowledgeable. Jazakallah khairan, dear colleagues, brothers and sisters. Thank you, Ustada. We're over time, but with your permission, if we take 5 minutes, is it okay just to answer maybe 1 or 2 questions, or is it okay for you?
Jazakallah.
Jazakallah khair. Please forgive us for going over time. So there is another question here. So I would appreciate great if I can get greater understanding of the recovery process from porn addiction, and what modality theory do you use for treating porn addiction? Is EMDR or brain spotting good?
Okay. So I would send people off to EMDR work if I notice that they are sitting on unresolved trauma, and it's a big hurdle in terms of their recovery. So then I would signpost them to one of my colleagues, and then they would go, and then EMDR is a short kind of intervention, 4-6 sessions, and then they can come back. Now, in terms of the framework, and I'm sorry, I could have, if I had time, I would have pulled up something up to show you what the framework looks like, and what is the process in terms of exactly how do we work with. But just as a rough thing, I can say to you that when people come, we assess. So the assessment is a form that we go through. So it's an assessment tool. So with that tool, that allows the therapist to see whether the addiction is mild to moderate, or is it severe, or, in terms of a scaling. So we scale that because that would inform then in terms of the intervention. So there is not one modality that I use. So obviously I'm trained systemically, but I do systemically and psychodynamically. That's my background. But then we use CBT stuff as well. And then we use motivational interviewing. So there would be different tools that would be used in terms of recovery, in terms of strategies. So we identify, again, there are tools like in terms of understanding what are the triggers, for instance. So we would spend a session kind of highlighting the environmental, the social, the person triggers as to what triggers a person, and then how do we prevent a relapse. So resources. So there is, in terms of the program, there are lots of different stages that the person has to go through. And with that, obviously, we incorporate spirituality. So there are different things like, for instance, just to quickly tell you, Jamal, so there is an acronym RUN, which we use. So RUN. So this is something that we've driven from Yusuf alayhi salam's story. So remember the place where Yusuf alayhi salam was incited by the Amir's wife, that kind of incident. So RUN means that R stands for that you remove yourself. So straight away, as soon as you know that you are going to be triggered, that could be one of your environmental triggers. For instance, clients know that if they are in an empty house alone by themselves, that's a big trigger. So they know that, so they have to remove themselves from that place. U stands for undistort your thinking. So undistort, like, it's not a big deal. I'm just going to browse a little bit. I'm not doing this. So that means that you have to undistort your thinking at that point. And N means never forget what you can lose or how you will feel afterwards. Because each episode, when somebody does watch something, straight away, the first thing that happens is a lot of shame and embarrassment. So there are lots of little tools that kind of we use to empower the clients so they can have these tools with them all the time, inshallah.
Amazing tools. Thank you for sharing. I love acronyms. That's so beautiful. SubhanAllah. It's a good way to remind ourselves about different things and approaches. This will be the final question, but there is actually a very interesting reflection that one person has shared. Thank you all for sharing, by the way. This time we did it anonymous, just because some people have written some matters that are more connected to their own family lives. So thank you all for your trust here. There is one person who says that it's about Western therapy. Whilst I was studying, my teacher said she makes the couple watch porn together, almost normalizing it in the West to understand expectation from both couples. I heard this before, by the way, so this is not the first time I heard this. Any reflection about this? Have you experienced that some people in mainstream psychology advocates this approach?
So can I be vulnerable and be very open that when I started my training, I mashallah, I'm married, I have 2 children, both my children are at university.
Mashallah, mashallah.
Please them. And I was finding it really difficult, just kind of really thinking about, oh my God, the books that are on my bookshelf, what's going on, what's happening. So initially with the course, when I went in, that was a big fear for me, that obviously you want to protect yourself. I did not want to be in a learning environment where there would be things that I had to then go through to endure or witness or watch, because obviously that was my boundary, that as a Muslim, that, and I'm sure you all would do the same, that we wouldn't cross. So I don't, and that's about the therapist really. So the training that I had, the person that I trained with, wasn't openly a Christian institute, but the facilitator I knew was a Christian. So in terms of their ethos and understanding, that really resonated with me. I think what can happen, for instance, in psychosexual work, sometimes the therapists, if that's their training, they can use erotical material as a tool to help the couple. But for us, obviously, as Muslims, that's our boundary. We understand that that's not the tool that we can use, but we also as therapists understand that erotic stuff between the spouse is very important for them to improve their connection. So we have different ways. So I'm sure Muslim therapists who do psychosexual work, we have modified our own way of working really. So the person who's saying what they've understood or witnessed, obviously that depends on the therapist, but I don't think that's a very common way of practice. I've never come across that in the UK. I don't think any of my non-Muslim colleagues would do that. I don't think that's ethical or even by the BACP standards permissible, really. I wouldn't think so.
I think it's a minority, and I think it's mostly from coaching. I think not like from people that are counselors or therapists, but I've seen and it's very much in this very liberal environments, liberal and very secular environments where they're trying to, change ethics and standards. That's been a discussion. It's been a discussion amongst educating, specifically young boys, at least in the Scandinavian context I've seen. And Scandinavia is one of the most liberal parts of the world, by the way. So I don't think this is standard for all secular countries, but nevertheless, where they say that almost introduce more like gender, almost like healthy porn, astaghfirullah, as a way to re-educate the boys, which I think is very problematic, of course. But nevertheless, this is probably what this person is referring to. Yes, go ahead, Ustada.
I was just saying that for them, obviously, they see pornography as a genre, really. So it's a genre. It's whatever that is. But that's about then recognizing that for us in terms of our boundaries or whatever, and starting from the basics, really, because if you think about the concept of the spiritual concept of two people coming together, that's the zina of the eyes. So there's absolutely no way anybody can normalize this and make this permissible, even as a tool. So when I work because I understand that kind of really, when we're working with a husband and wife and they want to improve their intimacy, then the erotica will have a place and a position between those two people. And how do you work on that's a different discussion. But I appreciate what you said there, Jamal. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khairan. And now it's adhan where I live as well. So this will be perfect end of our session. Thank you so much, Ustada Abeda, for joining us today. It has been such an honor to listen to you. We learned so much from your vast amount of knowledge and expertise and experience. Thank you for being so generous with your time and sharing so that we can learn and grow from your amazing work. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you tawfiq in helping all these brothers and sisters and couples and their healing trajectory towards living holistic lives and having a holistic approach rooted in Quran and Sunnah when it comes to intimacy, when it comes to healthy relationships, and when it comes to themselves and in their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rounds of digital applause to our excellent lecturer and Ustada today. We're looking forward to work with you, Ustada Abeda. We're looking forward to collaborate with you. And we're looking forward to support you in your excellent work. And hopefully we can have more lectures with you in the near future, because we see that the interest is very huge amongst all of our members within the ISIP movement and organization. And thank you to all of you, brothers and sisters, for all of your great reflections and questions. Please forgive us for the digital problems today. I need to resolve it after the session, inshallah. But hopefully to next time we have a session that we can open up our Zoom chat again so that everybody can reflect and connect with one another, because this is part of ISIP and how we utilize the Zoom chat. Nevertheless, thank you so much for joining, and please forgive me personally for any shortcomings. If I said anything wrong or did anything wrong, rest assured that all the mistakes are mine and all the khair is from Allah. And I want to thank all of my colleagues, Sister Nadira, Sister Fatima, Sister Aya, Sister Dania, Brother Rafai, and rest of the team for the amazing work you guys are doing with International Lecture Series. So thank you so much, Ustada, and take care of yourself. Extend our greetings to your family, and I wish you a great continuation of the day. If you want to share any last thoughts and reflection, feel free to do so before we end.
Just wanted to say Jazakallah khair, shukran. Really appreciate this opportunity and lots of du'as for your organization. I really appreciate the work that you guys do, and it's a phenomenal initiative. May Allah put barakah in it. And Jazakallah khair for all the audience who sat here patiently listening to me. It really humbled. Jazakallah khair, and hopefully see you all soon, inshallah. Jazakallah
We hope
khair.
to see you soon, and we will also email out the link to the recordings and